I have some concerns as well that I think we ought to revert back and stick with the by permit only, because again, you're talking about opening up for 2 or 3 nights a week downtown, and by the same token, we have a developer that's looking at putting in housing right there at the corner of David and 2nd Street, and we keep harping about bringing housing downtown, and I don't know, to me that is detrimental to trying to entice builders to come downtown when you're starting to allow open container areas for people out walking the streets and what you're trying to make into a bit of a residential and business area as well.
Councilman Powell.
Sorry, I was a little slow on the trigger there. I'm not looking at the ordinance right now, but I didn't recall it committing us to a certain number of days per week. I think it just gave us the authority to establish days where the open container rule would be in place. If I remember that correctly, and if we did believe.
Mr. Henley?
Councilman Powell, Council, I recollect that we had 2 nights designated, Friday and Saturday nights, for the open container area to be functional. And then Council had the option to establish one other night if they wanted to have like a Taco Tuesday night or a special night on some other day of the week to try to get people to come on down. Then that would be established too, and just that way people could plan around those activities. And then in addition to those, we would still have the more traditional ones such as Rock the Block or the Art Walk type of events, which we've had in the past and have been very successful. Those would be under still the auspices of the manager's office and the clerk's office, whereas these with the open container permit and this particular venue would be under the auspices of the council, though.
Councilman Huber.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to address Councilman Cathy's concern about trying to promote residential development downtown and thinking that that's inconsistent with allowing open containers in that designated area. I don't see that as being a problem. I think that if you look at all the details about the open container legislation that we are proposing here, this is not going to allow what Chief McFeeters would refer to as street inebriates to be out walking the streets carrying a brown bag with an open bottle in it or things like that, the kind of things that really create problems. What is being proposed here is, I think, sufficiently heavily regulated that I don't think that it would be detrimental to a residential area to have somebody out, walking down the street peacefully enjoying a beverage that they bought at a place just a little ways down the street. Also, while I'm talking, I'd kind of like to address this concern that some people have that we're treating one area of town differently or in a special way than other areas. The reality is that different parts of town are different. It would make no sense at all to say that, well, we're going to turn CY Avenue into an open container area or 12th Street into an open container area because everything's just so spread out that if you're going to do that, you might as well just say, well, we're going to just open the whole town up. There are areas of town that are different, and I think that we need to recognize that. That does not mean that we're being mean to or discriminating against people that happen to have their businesses in another part of town. If there's something that comes along that, say, on 12th Street, they can come in and say, hey, here's something special that we'd like to do here, and it makes sense, yeah, we can do that. But I don't buy this argument that we're treating downtown specially without a reason. I think there's a good reason behind what we're thinking about doing here. Those are my thoughts on that stuff.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
I know that we're discussing like multiple topics at once, but just before I forget, it was brought up to me by two people with liquor licenses in the city. I guess Cheyenne, I don't know if it was recent, I'm not actually sure when it was passed, but they actually allow for like the delivery of alcohol, like basically the same thing as delivery of McDonald's is kind of the comparison that they used. And, you know, they had just asked that since we're looking at the ordinance, you know, that we consider that as well. Yeah, sorry, I'm not even saying that I have an opinion on it necessarily. It's been brought up to me by two individuals with a liquor license now that, you know, it seems like Cheyenne has had success for their liquor owners with allowing delivery.
I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that one. I'll give you my 2 cents on that. I just, I think that really opens up a big can of worms for whoever certainly would want to step up to the plate and take over that delivery and take an alcohol to a person. I mean, you still have to be tips trained. You still have to make sure that you weren't delivering alcohol to minors, or there weren't minors on the other side. I think it would just be it'd be a nightmare to enforce, I think, and that's just my 2 cents. I don't think that's and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. City Manager, but Evansville is trying that right now, aren't they? Didn't they pass it to where they could deliver?
Mr. Mayor, at the very least, they had considered that as an idea. I'm not sure if that ever came to pass or not, to be totally candid.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm 100% against it, but I don't see the upside to it. And I'm sure the chief, if he wanted to give his 2 cents, certainly could tell us a little bit more about that. Councilman Bates.
I sent an email to the city attorney regarding this, that I've had quite a few emails regarding it, and if you could, Mr. Henley, I thought that according to the state statute that is not allowed, I thought. Can you expand on that?
I'll be happy to. Thank you, Councilman Bates, Mayor. In fact, I did look at this. Originally, we were approached by Evansville, where they thought that their folks would be coming into Casper and trying to deliver. And I said, you know, think that over hard and long, because that will be a violation and we'll be citing you for that. But then the question did come up subsequent to that. Well, should our liquor license owners, the retail owners, be permitted to deliver liquor around the community? And looking at the state statute, it was my decision, as well as that of the Mills attorney, that would be statutorily violative. And there was a brochure published by the Liquor Division that referenced that, and they said, you know, check with your own lawyer about that. I think that Evansville was tending to want to go that way, but I've not heard of them doing that. But it certainly is a possibility. I know Cheyenne has been pretty loose in a lot of ways on what they've done, and this may be something they're actually trying. I would be surprised, though, if many liquor dealers who have their license wrapped up in their property, which is typically the way that the Wyoming liquor laws mandate that you operate your business. The point of sale has to be in the property itself. That's a state statute. And so to do a workaround, I think, then detracts from what you bought or what you thought you had, because if you then have someone come in, Joe Blow's liquor dealer, something like one of the big places in, I'm sure, Denver or the like, and they could basically take 80% of the business probably by undercutting and then having the entire city at their beck and call, and we'll deliver to you. So I would be surprised if many liquor dealers would want that. There seemed to be some upside to it, maybe as far as people that were drunk already and going to get more liquor, you wouldn't have them on the roads. But other than that, I can't think of too many upsides. And I do think it's violative of the law, and have so opined in my discussions with the Evansville attorney as well as the Mills attorney, and let the county attorney know that, in my opinion, as well.
So, Mr. Henley, the point of sale, if it would have to occur inside the building, that, of course, could take place via phone, but you're not able to verify who's on the other end or the age of the person on the other end making the purchase.
You can. I'm sure it would, then if it's by phone, it's going to be by credit card, but
Right.
Who knows?
Right. Okay. Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've bought wine over the internet, and first of all, you can't send liquor legally through the U.S. Post Office. It's got to come UPS. And a lot of the wine dealers in California have found Wyoming's laws difficult to deal with, and so they choose not to do that. A lot of the vineyards will send you wine, but not all of them will send it to Wyoming. On the other hand, if somebody calls into one of our retail establishments and gives them a credit card for it, and an employee of that establishment delivers it and actually looks for somebody over 21 years old, like FedEx does, and I must admit, I've never been asked to show my driver's license to a FedEx guy, but I'm a little out of that date. But I wouldn't have a problem with it if it's an employee of the organization that sold it, but it would have to be a credit card transaction online. You can't take cash for it at the door, and you can't take a credit card at the door. It has to occur and then be delivered by a full retail liquor license employee. And I'm not sure they'd really want to take that on. It's just not worth the effort. But I would have a problem with it if we did. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilman Bates?
As far as the delivery, I'd support that. If they keep some people at home than coming out and possibly driving drunk, and it can be delivered to them and they stay off the roads, that is one thing that I would totally support, because it is a person from that business that is not intoxicated delivering it in closed container to a household that may not be the best people to be on the roads. So if that, to me, I think that would be a really good thing for Casper to consider, and the council to consider. And not to totally switch subjects, but talking about the open container permit for downtown, and maybe I'm missing something, but I actually would like to see, I see that there is no fee for open container permit. I think anyone that's downtown that is in that area that wants to be a part of the open container permit and allow it, I think we should have a fee, so then we actually know what businesses are wanting to participate, and also it's a little bit of revenue, whether it's $25 or $50. I don't think it needs to be much, and it could just be a yearly fee, but I think we should consider, Laramie has a $50 fee, so I'd actually like to see $25, $50 for the year for those businesses that are going to participate in it downtown.
Councilman Huber, did you have some?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Henley. I didn't quite understand, John, what you said with reference to the state statutes. Do the state statutes allow for home delivery or not? Or are they silent on that?
Thank you, Councilman Huber, Mayor, Council. In fact, the statutes are silent on that. They don't address it. underlying statutory basis, though, for all of Wyoming's liquor laws are identified with a place. If you look at your applications and all of the applications you have, it's defined to a place. That's what you have the license for. That's what you have your business. It's not that you're going to be delivering it around town or the like. And the essence of course, a retail liquor establishment is selling liquor to customers. And so therefore, it seems if that's going to be taking place at the place of business, then that's where the delivery should typically be made to. To say that there should be then a sub-license, because I'm going to contract with someone else, you go deliver my liquor. Basically, we've extended a liquor privilege to someone who's not licensed by the city. I suppose you could say, well, my employee is doing it as opposed to a contract licensor, but again, you've then kind of violated that tether, which we've always had, that the liquor license is attached to a place. And so it doesn't specifically address it. That's why the division was walking around it pretty lightly when they put out their flyer. And I thought that I may have sent this off to you all as well. My letter to Councilman Bates is a confidential attorney-client privilege matter. And so the essence and kind of the nuances are explained in there, as well as the actual statutory language, as well as the reference to the state liquor flyer is referenced in there as well. And I think that was maybe 3-4 weeks ago.
Well, Mr. Mayor, just a quick follow-up to Mr. Henley. So would some of the concerns that you were just speaking about be addressed by if it was required that they have to be delivered by a regular employee of the establishment?
It wouldn't in my mind, Councilman. I think in my mind this would be illegal under Wyoming statutes as they're currently adopted by the legislature. But this may be a good question if we in fact do have this. You're saying, Mr.
Henley, that your opinion to us is that the entire idea of off-premise delivery, whether it's by a contractor, an employee, or whatever, that whole idea is illegal under Wyoming statutes. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would respectfully suggest that that kind of closes that aspect of the matter. I think we need to follow our attorney's advice on that point, yeah.
Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps I confused the issue. When I said I buy wine online, that's directly from the winery in Timbuktu, California. And typically they have found Wyoming's rules to sell wine from their refinery in California outside of any retail liquor licensed person in Wyoming. They found it a little ominous. And they just, not every one of them will do it. You've got to have a pretty good sized organization to try and jump through the hoops to do it. So I was not talking about I was talking about wine that you buy or liquor you buy outside of the state of Wyoming without going through the state of Wyoming's warehouse. And typically wineries find that difficult to do. Some of them will do it, some of them won't. But the issue of a local delivery, I would go by John's advice also. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, so when you obviously come back to the original, we have several questions that need to be answered. So as far as the open container, we're talking about hours on that.
Mr. Mayor, that tended to be one of the issues that were unresolved with respect to that particular idea, I think.
Okay, I figured we'd take them one at a time. So we have it as 12. We have had discussions at 10 and possible discussions at 11. So does council have a way that they'd rather lean on as far as hours for open container? Councilman Bates.
Meet in the middle, I say 11.
That's where I'm leaning, is 11 o'clock, just because of the fact that we're gonna have some spillover, taking into account that it is gonna, we are gonna have some cost to that if we have law enforcement down there, potential overtime or whatever it might be, but it just kind of makes sense to, as a catch-all. So on that issue, can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on 11 o'clock for open container hours? All right, looks like everybody's thumbs up on that. Okay. So did we have any others on, any other unresolved issues on open container?
Mayor, on open container, I think that that takes care of the principal question. You know, operational goes to that eventually, but in a roundabout way. But yeah, I think operationally, and we still had a couple of permit values that we needed to try to fill in tonight as well. If you could give that some thought, then we can at least have it for you so you could view it the next council meeting.
Permit values being?
We had two permits that we were newer, and the amount. So the special malt beverage permit, you know, one of the things, whether you wanted to open that up, which, you know, you don't have to do that, and just limit it to government operations. But we don't have how much that would cost on a yearly basis. And I think it's been recommended by the clerk's office that maybe $1,000 on a yearly basis, and then that would be a yearly permit as opposed to just a 24-hour permit. So it's different than the usual malt beverage permit. And then we had one other permit that was to be issued, and that dealt with the manufacturers and when they would go off premises and how much that would be charged to obtain those permits. They're limited to 12 permits, but they can go off site and deliver and show their product basically. And I think that there was just a recommendation of a minimal fee there, somewhere between $25 and $50 per permit.
We have any comments from council on those items there? I guess not. Is that, so are those the recommendations that you've given to us?
I think those are the recommendations that came out of Fleur's office.
Okay. So I guess give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down whether you're okay with them moving forward with the recommendations that came out of the clerk's office on those. Okay, thumbs up on those.
Great, thank you.
And then I think back to hours of business operation for retail. And I don't know that we've really come to an agreement as to what we're going to do. I know there was, we had, correct me if I'm wrong, we first had a value on it, and I think it was Councilman Hopkins came back and we actually lowered, after their discussions, we lowered those hours down. Is there a suggestion by anybody on council now or by staff of how that should be, the verbiage for that, or what the hours should be for a retail liquor license to be required to be open? And maybe Mr. Henley?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We basically had done this by talking about operational and having a definition of that within the proposed ordinance, and that still exists, and it does make reference, though, to weekly operations as well. And so between those two, I think those were the ones that were more restrictive, talking about the weekly basis. So weekly basis means at least 8 hours per day, 5 days a week, for 46 weeks for retail and bar and grill licenses at a location not owned by the state of Wyoming or government entity, and at least 5 hours per day, 5 days a week for 50 weeks per year for a restaurant license. And that's the way that currently stands. And I think that, Councilman Hopkins, that they were both at 50 weeks per year. And Councilman Hopkins said, well, 46 for retail and bar and grill licenses would seem reasonable to him, but he thought, I believe that restaurants would be 50 weeks per year. But then we talked with the liquor dealers, and again, they had some concerns about that it may stifle their creativity or ability to take extended vacations. So, as far as operational, then we have what's in the current permit, or in the current ordinance. Operational for non-governmental owned properties means offering for sale on an ongoing basis for 12 months per year during the license term to the general public alcohol malt beverages as authorized. And then basically that is tied in with that weekly basis requirement. We can go back to what the current language of the code is and just delete that reference to weekly basis and put in operational, and that would mean offering the sale to the general public of alcohol, liquor, and malt beverages for not less than 3 consecutive months during any calendar year. And that was kind of tied to the seasonal license as well, so that would encompass everything. And the second one, again, which is more flexible, but it really doesn't have the structure of what we were originally talking about, operational. Again, you would take away the weekly basis definition and say operational for non-governmental owned properties means offering for sale over the course of the license year to the general public alcohol, malt beverages as authorized. And so basically we're just saying over the course of the year you have to do this. But that's, again, relatively ambiguous. And that's the flexibility and the lack of structure. But that's an option. And then the third one is basically sticking with you have to be offering your wares for sale on an ongoing basis for 12 months per year during the license term year to the general public. And you can, though, if you are planning to make a change to your process or you're applying for a license and you're going to have a supper club, you're only going to be open 4 nights a week, you would come before the council and say, we'd like to have a license, but I'm only going to be open 4 nights a week because Sunday nights, Monday night, and Tuesday nights in Casper just don't work for me for whatever reason. And then you would have to make a decision as the council as to whether or not you would grant that exception.
So I guess I have 2 questions for you. Then liquor dealers, when they were asked about, when they told us that this was not good for them, because if they wanted to resell the license later on, they'd give them a select pool if we put a number to it. Did they ever come back and tell us what was acceptable to them as far as what numbers would be? Or give us a solution to the problem?
No specificity, no solutions as far as I know.
Okay, and then the second question I would have, of all the options that were just read, it basically says you have to be open, but we don't have a number of days. So essentially anybody that is parking their license right now or doing the bare minimum to get by could continue to do such, and then we've actually resolved nothing, correct?
Well, I think in my mind that probably is correct, because if you were just to raise it at the last minute and say, oh, now we've decided you've parked your license because you weren't open enough, but we never required you to be open enough, it in my mind, it makes it a more difficult sell for you to validly take that license back.
Okay, so I guess I'd submit back to the rest of the council that it needs to have a number on it. I mean, you know, we obviously come across this problem to where if we don't have a number to put in place to hold license holders accountable to at least be open a minimum amount of time, then essentially they can just park it and sit on it forever and never use it. So my suggestion is, and it doesn't, I get the other side of it, I don't want to go to the extreme to where it makes license to where somebody doesn't want to sell or won't be able to sell it, because if I buy it and I only want to be open X amount of time, but I have to be open a greater amount of time, then I take a chance of losing the investment I just made. So I think we need to have a number on it. I don't think it needs to be an excessive number, but it needs to be a number. So is there any suggestions by anybody? Vice Mayor?
Kind of just shooting from the hip here, because I don't know that any of us probably know what's actually going to work in the real world. I mean, what if we just say like, I don't know, like 300 days a year or something like that? I mean, not be restrictive about the hours, not be restrictive about, I mean, I guess I think the problem is we have to be careful not to punish the people who are using their licenses and have them, you know, moving. What we're trying to stop is people from parking licenses, but I don't want to punish the people with licenses trying to get at the people parking them.
And while I agree with that, I think if you go back to 300 days per year but don't put a time on it, then it's going to take me 300 trips to my store to unlock the door and walk inside and walk back out and lock the door again. So I don't know. And I don't know that we can answer this tonight. I know we need to get this resolved, but at the same time, maybe is there a way that we can even just take this one, of course it's all part of the same ordinance, but one issue and do some more homework on it maybe this week? Or you know, I'd really like to have involvement from the alcohol dealers to be able to sit down and tell us what their solution is, help us take care of this problem, and help us find a resolution to this, not just sit back and say, well, that's not going to work for me. Okay, well, I get it. It's not going to work for you. What will? And how can you help us get to that answer? Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with all of the things that you just said. What I would suggest, we've worked on this for quite a while, and everybody's had quite a bit of opportunity for input and everything. What I would suggest is that we contact the liquor dealers, tell them this is coming up for third reading next time. If they've got a suggestion, they need to step up and get it to us so that we'll have it in time to do something with it. I would hate to see this drag out any longer than it needs to be.
And I would agree with that too. Councilman Hopkins.
I concur with Councilman Huber. We've talked about this a long time, but we've already had feedback just saying that the decision to renew a liquor license is on our shoulders to begin with. And if we have somebody who's clearly abusing the system by de facto parking a liquor license inside a building that's stocked with liquor, and you can look in the windows, he just never opened. I think that falls back on our shoulders to say, look, we're not going to renew it. You're not really in business. You're just parking a license, and you're saying you've got a store, but if it's never open, hey. So I would just like to accept the responsibility for that and let it go at that. And I think that would make the liquor dealers happy, quite honestly. But I agree with Mike's counsel, too, that let's talk to them again and see how they feel about it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, so on that one, move forward as is. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down to move forward with the hours of operation for retail as is. One, two, three, four. Okay. All but one.
Excuse me, Mayor, as is means as is currently exist in the ordinance or in the proposed ordinance?
As in the proposed ordinance. As in the proposed ordinance is what I meant, so just make sure we're clear on that. Okay. Are there any other issues we need to deal with on this one?
Mr. Mayor, I don't think so. Mr. Attorney is.
That was great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Additional meeting follow-up items.
Mr. Mayor, I think we had that line in there to follow the traditional elements of the work session agenda to see if there were other kinds of items that weren't specifically called out in the agenda this evening that maybe we didn't catch.
Okay. Does anybody have any additional meeting follow-up that we need to do? Okay. Doesn't look like it. Okay, we'll move on to the class and comp final report. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We are at a point in this process where the final report has been submitted to the city. the report of which we forwarded to you in your packets. And we're kind of at the point where we need the final blessing, so to speak, not only as it relates to accepting the report, but as it relates to an implementation strategy. And that's where it gets a little more challenging, particularly in the standpoint of, and against the backdrop of what we're dealing with financially and economically as an organization and as a community. I've asked Ms. Belser to walk us through some of the detail of this report. And I'm going to ask you to kind of keep your ear out for a couple things. One of the things that you're going to hear is that indeed we are introducing kind of a bifurcated system that is different from what we have had traditionally in the organization. And what I mean by that is the structure by which we are proposing is very much consistent with what the market is suggesting, but it suggests that we look at the public safety world through a step process and the non-public safety side of our organization through what they call an open range process. And so while they are different and they do require various management nuances differently, it is what the market would dictate in terms of what's going on and what's happening, and certainly is over and above what it is that it would recommend in terms of just a regular sort of pay and wage comparison. So I'd like you to kind of, tune in to those elements of the discussion, because they do have certain management strategies that would be different than what we're used to. The other thing that I would suggest you, listen into to make sure you are comfortable with what's being recommended is with respect to the implementation strategy. As you can imagine, that is a cost-driven approach that we have to be really sensitive to right now, which would suggest that a lot of the elements of the study that need to be implemented really can't be implemented until we have a better feel for what our economic future looks like. And so we're proposing that the heaviest lift of the implementation that we have in front of us would take place no earlier than the new fiscal year, which would mean fiscal year 22, actually. And so we are basically proposing that it be postponed a year, a fiscal year, and we look at implementing the pieces and parts that are least expensive, if you will, in the interim. So see what you think of those kinds of recommendations as well. And Mr. Mayor, my hope is that after you hear the data tonight and so on, you ask the questions that you have concerns about or need additional information for. And with that, certainly what we get by way of direction this evening will drive the closing portions of our preparing the budget for adoption later in June. And so if I could, Mr. Mayor, defer the floor to Ms. Belser, I would sure appreciate it.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thank you for that lead-in, City Manager. What I'd like to do is just a brief summary. And, if you remember, it was about a little over a month ago. So we had Lori Graves come, well, actually, she did it by WebEx. She presented to you on the findings. And then we do have the final report that's in your packet. So what I'm going to do is just kind of do some highlights from that. The overall compensation strategy that we have currently, it did show that we are competitive with our pay and our benefits, which is a really good thing. As the city manager said, they did recommend a completely revised pay structure for general employees, which is an open range system instead of a step-based system. So I'll get into a little bit more detail on that when we go over the implementation phase. Also a revised pay structure for the police scale. Hi, I didn't know I would be on camera. Okay, so The pay structure for the police scale, they're recommending similar to what we currently have with our step structure. However, there is some challenges with that, as the city manager described, as far as fully funding each step that is being proposed. They also recommended vacation accrual for employees during their first 4 years of employment increase. So that is a really good suggestion, and that would mean that employees would accrue 12 days instead of just 10 days in their first 4 years of employment with the city. Graves recommends increasing the employer contribution to the law enforcement pension as budget allows. So it does indicate, the study did indicate that we are competitive, but on average we're a little bit low. So we do the minimum requirements with Wyoming Retirement, so the employer can always opt to pay more on the employee portion or employer portion. So that was a recommendation. And I think it was July 2002 was the last time that there was an increase on the employer contribution. Another thing is consolidating the administrative titles. So that is something that Graves determined, that we have a lot of different titles for administrative type positions. And so what they're recommending is consolidating them into fewer administrative positions from 10 to 6. Graves reviewed the status of the city's supervisory level. And that has to do with the Fair Labor Standard Act with the exempt and non-exempt status. So there was some concern on whether they were classified appropriately. They did a really high-level view and gave us a couple positions that we should look into further, which we can do. And then they also suggested maybe do a little bit more detailed work on ones that we have more internal knowledge to look into further. They recommend a tool allowance as a small but meaningful perk for retention and recruitment of fleet mechanics. So currently it's $500 a year, and they suggested to increase that to $800 a year. Graves recommends different titles and job descriptions for each of the assistants to the city manager, just to more appropriately reflect, since they do different duties. They are properly classified, but just look into that a little bit differently for capturing what they're actually doing in their respective positions. Graves also recommends that we add job equivalencies or experience equivalencies rather than the educational requirements. So that is one of the things that we had heard up front and put in our scope of services to review that, to see what other people are doing, because in our current classification system we did have educational requirements, and many times we would remove the filter for minimum requirements. So this is something that we can do that will be very good to do experience equivalencies. Graves recommends that when hiring offers be made, that hiring supervisors collaborate with HR for internal equity consideration. And again, that's with going with the new system especially. It will be even more important that we do that collaboration with hiring supervisors to make sure that we look in, if we go to an open range system, that we're looking at internal equity too, and we don't kind of create a lot of compression with our existing employees. Graves recommends some additional positions for progression and retention purposes. So that's an example of like a mechanic. We have mechanic 1, 2, and then they actually talked with our mechanic group and feel that there's a need for mechanic 3. So it's a higher level mechanic, so it's a naturally progression as budget allows to have that other tier. And there were some other positions also listed in the final report for your reference. So as I said, in summary, Graves believes that the city's pay structure has been well maintained over the years that we've had this classification structure, and that we have competitive pay and benefits. Those are just some of the suggestions, and as the city manager alluded to, some of them are not as costly as others. So when we go down to phase 1, July 1, which is with our new fiscal year, if you would support it, we could easily do the paid time off increases for our newer employees to accrue 12 vacation days a year instead of 10 days during the first 4 years of employment. The only liability with that is if they didn't use their vacation time. If they ended employment, then we would have to pay that out, whatever unused vacation time. But hopefully they would take advantage of that benefit and use their vacation days. And then the fleet tool allowance, again, that's very small, relatively small, and we did incorporate that into the fleet budget. So that would be in the budget if you decided to approve that. That's already in there, but that would be a cost of $2,100. So that's what we're calling phase one, because that's the least expensive option that we could probably start to do right away. Phase two would be July 1, 2021. So that's the implementation of both the general new classification plan and then also the police plan with option two. They have two options listed in the material that you were supplied in the final report. And option two is the one that the consultants recommended, and we as the city also support. So with both of those, since it is based on market data, what we did is we, on this option, tried to slide people over into the positions with relatively no cost, minimal cost, I should say. There are 11 positions that were found to be below the market minimum for the new pay scale. Right now, they're fine in our pay scale, but with the new pay scale that Graves is recommending, they would be below the minimum of the market. And so there's 11 positions that we believe we would have to bring up to that minimum if we were to go with that new scale. So that's where that cost is approximately $10,000 to do that. Something to keep in mind is that all of these costs are currently where the steps are in place with the steps not being frozen. So the longer that we continue with our step increases, the longer that, or the more potential there is for costs to increase, because if somebody's at a step 3 now, they might go to a step 4, that kind of thing. So that's another thing to keep in mind. We also have 73 non-full-time employees, and that figure was a little bit more challenging to come up with because we based it off of the hours that they actually worked in the past year, and we don't know what they're actually working this year as far as if they'll have the same amount of hours. So since they're non-full-time, that's a little bit more challenging to put a price tag on. So it's a high estimate that we put $62,000 on that. Implement the new Graves proposed option 2 for the Casper police schedule. This is a step system. Again, that is traditional in the public safety arena, and that's part of the reason why Graves did suggest that we keep that step system. But it is worth noting that there is a concern with affordability to fully fund each step each fiscal year. So to me, this is my biggest concern because I know that our culture has always been that you automatically get that step increase, and it's been only relatively recently that we have ever endured the step freezes. And so, you know, although employees should never expect that they automatically get a 5% each year, that's kind of how it's been practiced in our organization, and I think that that creates a challenge to have I guess that expectation of especially employees who have been here a long time that have always expected that pay increase to be on a step system and understanding that maybe if we don't fully fund that, they're not going to get the step that is predetermined, you know, on the Graves plan. Some of the steps are 5%, some are 3%. And I think that will be something that we just really need to upfront understand if we are going to keep step systems for public safety, that if we're not able to fully fund that, there are other ways to, as budget allows, to bring them in off step, but then there's always going to be that expectation, I believe, that employees will want to be on that step system and actually get paid what that step states that it will be paid. Okay, so let's see where am I at. Okay, and then Also, increase employer contribution to law enforcement pension by 1%. So one of the things Graves did suggest is that we implement it, phase it in over time for that additional benefit for the Wyoming retirement pension. Titles, any changes with the FLSA, non-exempt, exempt, position reviews, any job descriptions, education requirements, all of that. Those are things that don't really have significant cost, or we wouldn't believe they would have significant costs. So we would just do that when we decide to do that first real phased-in implementation. And then the third phase would be January 1st, 2022, reassess budget availability to evaluate pay increases for positions in areas of compression. So one of the things we are expecting is when we move to a completely new system, we will have compression. Right now we have compression towards the higher part of our scale that have been here for, those employees that have been here for the longer period of time. So what we're going to do when they get into the new scale is we're going to kind of shift that compression more to the middle. So we will have some compression issues, which means you might have some newer employees that are hired in at a level or above a level where existing employees are already being paid. So we know that going in, and you need to be aware of that going into a new structure. We're going to have some of those things that we can't address until we have the financial ability to address all of those compression issues, and that's what we're hoping we'll be able to do in January 1st, 2022. HR will need to develop guidelines and criteria for the new system. So I am looking forward to a little bit of time to kind of work through all of those things, and we've been working really closely with the executive team. And after tonight, after getting some direction from you, we plan to have a meeting with Graves Consulting. They're going to do a WebEx meeting with all of the employees, and we're going to record it so that all the employees will know what to expect with this implementation, phased-in implementation, or whatever we decide here tonight. So that's my summary.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so for what we need tonight, we need to know what questions council has, what homework we might need to do beyond what you've seen here tonight, and or other things we might need to do to prepare, again, the budget in order to get it ready for passage later in June.
Councilman Cathy.
Yes, I know it was mentioned going from 10 to 12 days vacation the first 2 years. What was their overall justification for those extra 2 days?
They just found that competitive-wise that we were a little bit short with other areas that they had asked for their paid time off policies. So other entities in our market data that we had determined, they found that we were a little bit less than other entities. So that's why they made that suggestion.
And as a follow-up, the other entities were?
I don't know what their exact days were. They just made that recommendation based off of the information that they saw. I didn't see all the raw data.
I was just curious because that was the first time I'd heard of 12 days in the first years like that. That was why I was curious as to who they were using. Maybe it's time for me to go out and find a different job.
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, Director Belser, I believe the entities that we would have looked at in order to determine that was not completely consistent with market would have been the comparable cities and so forth that the consultant evaluated. Some of those cities included Grand Junction, Colorado, if I remember correctly, Logan, Utah, some of the cities around our state, some of the other regional, if you will, cities that have similar sophistication and influence that we would, positions, et cetera.
It'd be in the packet on page 2 of Graves Consulting's
Thank
it
you.
has in there who they used.
Thank you. That's correct.
So, Mr. Mayor and City Manager, what you're saying is that basically this is government entity versus private industry type scenarios.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy, we actually included private sector agencies as well. And those entities were typically more local than the communities I just described to you. And so we tried to do a mix of both public sector and private sector agencies that have comparable value to what it is that the city of Casper works with.
Councilman Cathy, the municipalities they used were Cheyenne, Gillette, Jackson, Laramie, Rock Springs, and Sheridan. And then other Wyoming employers were Casper College, Natrona County School District, State of Wyoming, and Wyoming Medical Center. And then there's outside municipalities that were outside of the state of Wyoming, ranging in different states: Montana, South Dakota, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado.
Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I noted that other Wyoming employers only included one relatively private industry, and that was Wyoming Medical Center. And, well, I understand that private industry is not required to share their salaries with anybody, but the only reference to the Rocky Mountain or the Employers Council was defining 100 jobs that were kind of similar. I was a little disappointed that we didn't get something from the Employers Council from other organizations other than the Wyoming Medical Center. That's a quasi-private organization. That's the only one in the whole list of municipalities, employers, and outside municipalities that's really a relatively private organization. The other question I had, and that was just a comment, but the question I had is there's a graph that talks about Casper proposed pay structure, and the x-axis has numbers 10, 15, 20, 25. What are those numbers? Are they years of experience?
Are you referring to the grade in the grade column where it says 10?
It's got three plots: the current rate, market rate, and new midpoint. I think their report is page 6, I believe.
Okay.
But they don't give you a title on the x-axis.
Packet number 46 or page 46.
Well, I've got it on page 48 of our packet number.
You're correct, sorry.
Okay. And I didn't print it out in color.
You don't have to get it tonight, but someday just ask them what the x-axis means.
Sure. I told you that, and I will follow up with you. I didn't think that she would be needed on this call since a month ago we went over some of this information, so my apologies. I didn't familiarize myself with a lot of the information that I thought was more specific to their methodology. So I'll find out for you and let you all know.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Belzer. The other thing I wanted to say is overall, I think Graves did a pretty good job. I just wish we'd had more private industry input. We have a situation where we have people in governmental organizations say they're not paid as well as industry, but on the other hand, better benefits. And quite honestly, I don't see anything here that really disputes that at all. So just a comment. Thank you.
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hopkins, I don't disagree with your assessment with respect to the inclusion of some private sector entities. And I would add that I think that chart does try to compare tenure to salary and the various wage midpoints and so forth pursuant to those two criteria. So I would agree with you. That's probably years of service on that x-axis.
Mr. Manager, I have a question. I don't know if this is more directed to you or to Ms. Belzer, but so if I'm reading this right, the police are going to remain on a step increase scale. And I guess the question I have, there was a plan that we looked at, I think about a year ago, that was a complete different type of a plan that I believe it had a step in there for master sergeant, I believe it was, and then it was like an appoint system. Was that ever presented to Graves to look at to possibly implement that in, or what happened with that is my question.
Mr. Mayor, indeed that was discussed with Graves, and they did compare a number of those movement options with respect to what they see in the market. And the recommendations that they provided did include the concepts that were adopted by the department prior to the study taking place. And so the master officer, senior officer positions are anticipated with regard to the recommendations that they put forward for the police department specifically, sworn officers in particular. The difference that I think I would like to make sure everybody understands with regard to this department in particular, because it did create kind of a different recommendation coming forward through Graves. And as we discussed at the very beginning, while the rest of the organization is not recommended to be included on a step system, the police department is. The primary difference with respect to what's being recommended for this program would be how we deal with the incremental increases every single year for not only the police department, who will remain on kind of a step system if council adopts the plan, but how we get them through that step system each year. Because what Graves is recommending is that indeed the way that we do it now, in terms of what they see on the market and what they're recommending through their professional view, I guess you'd say, is that the way we do it now is not a sustainable, affordable means of getting employees through that wage step plan every single year. And so from time to time, council may recommend that a 5% increase with each of those steps may not be affordable, but 3% might be. And so the disparity that creates is for some of the employees who are still on the wage band system and haven't capped out, would in fact, ostensibly be viewed as not being fully funding their incremental growth through that chart, because those steps would be developed at a 5% increment, if you will. So that is something that would need to be, clear as council decides each year how to navigate those issues from an affordability standpoint from now on. Ms. Belzer, did I get that right?
Yeah, you did good. I was just going to point out that it is on, I think, your council packet, page 61. It shows the proposed police scale, and so it does show you on option 1, that's where senior police officer is, and then on option 2, senior police officer is incorporated into the police officer 7 steps they propose on option 2. So that's the difference. But it is incorporating the senior police officer into that option 2 as well.
Any other questions or comments from council? Councilman Bates.
Thank you. If I can go back up to the phase 1 and phase 2, the phase 1, the part-time or paid time off, the increased vacation, wouldn't that be a cost to the city by doing the additional 12 for the first 4 years? That's my first question. And then second question on phase 2, about the proposed minimum market range, which would total approximately 10,000, almost 11,000, 10,100 almost. You mentioned that currently those 11 full-time employees are at a equal pay, but potentially they're going to be below that minimum. So I guess my question really is how far of a difference is what they're at now, and if we increased it, what's the difference in that amount? If I'm asking that question right.
Okay. To answer your first question, there's a liability, but there's not a true cost at this point with increasing the vacation accrual, because the intention of increasing that benefit is that employees will actually use that time off and they'll take their vacation time. So the only liability or true cost is lost productivity if they're taking a vacation day. But as far as having to pay that benefit out, it would only be if they accrued that vacation, didn't use it, and then left the city, left employment, then we would have to pay out any unused vacation time. So there is a liability, but the intention behind it is that they would use their vacation time, and we wouldn't have to pay it out. So there is a cost for that, that could be. And we didn't estimate what that cost would be because we're hoping that people would just use that extra benefit. Your second question, does that answer your first question? Okay. The second question, so our current classification structure, those 11 employees are just fine with our existing classification structure. So our current classification plan does not indicate that those 11 employees are being underpaid. If we go to a completely new pay scale, which is what Graves is recommending, since it's based on market, the market data has the minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum pay range, that open range for positions. So to move those positions onto that pay scale, that new pay scale, that's where it would be below the minimum with the movement onto that pay scale. So as far as I don't have all that information right in front of me as far as where each of those 11 employees are on our pay scale existing and where it would be other than just the total amount. I was just looking at the total amount. If we were to do one, we should do them all. That would be my recommendation anyway. Does that answer?
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have sort of a question, but also sort of a comment. I don't think that we should get sidetracked or distracted by this potential increase in vacation days being a financial burden, because we already have in place, unless I'm grossly mistaken, a policy about how much time, how much accrued vacation time an employee can carry over. And so I think that already existing policy would indeed encourage, as these folks are talking about, that these people would indeed take their vacation time. And I'm a firm believer in people taking their vacation time. God created vacation time for a reason, and that's because everybody needs a rest away from their work. And so I just don't think we should be distracted on that point.
You have a comment? No. Any other comments or questions? Vice Mayor Lewis.
Just really quick, after reviewing everything, I really liked the way that we phased it out over the years. I mean, I think it was the way that we grouped things and pieced them apart, I think is really smart, and it was really fit in with the report, and I just wanted to make note of that.
Okay, Mr. City Manager.
So, Mr. Mayor, if there aren't any other questions, we'd be happy to take your direction one way or the other and embrace it and go from there.
I think the biggest thing for this fiscal year would be the increase in vacation hours, correct? And, okay. So, as far as council is concerned, thoughts on moving forward, as it's been proposed tonight, and obviously this year would be an increase in vacation hours, but for that one class of employee, yeah. So I guess can we get a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Okay, thumbs up. All right, thank you. We will move on to recycling options follow-up. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Tonight is the opportunity to evaluate what it is that the community responded with pursuant to the recycling survey, if you care to term it that way. In my opinion, and with regard to surveys I've seen over the years, this is one of those surveys that have been responded to in an enormous fashion. I'm not used to seeing that kind of turnout, if you will, for surveys of any question. And it would sure appear that the community has a pretty high regard for recycling and for the program and for the ways in which they'd like to see it happen. So I'm really happy with that, actually. And furthermore, I'm really happy with the way in which the survey was designed. You will see that we got almost exact spread with regard to the people from the wards in the community that responded to this survey. And you'll also see that almost in a mandate standpoint, directed the organization to maintain recycling in its current form, despite the fact that it would likely need to incur a rate increase. And so what I would like for you to gain tonight is some insight with respect to what we think the community was telling us in regard to that survey effort. Feel free to ask us questions as to what it is that you'd like to see by way of additional information or homework to be done, additional direction, if you will. And otherwise, if council is prepared to offer us some directive this evening on this matter, we'd be happy to take it, and we will of course prepare the budget accordingly. Although as it relates to the rate increase, if that is the direction you go, we would need to have a rate hearing and those kinds of things, similar to what we've done with the other rates for the other utilities and so forth. So we've got a lot of ways we can go tonight, but primarily I wanted you to hear the feedback, and if you're ready, provide us direction. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time over to Ms. Martinez. We also have Ms. Langston here tonight, and certainly Mr. Beamer to guide us through any of the additional detail that you might be interested in tonight.
Okay.
Mayor, Council, we're going to share the screen. We have 3 quick slides that kind of go over what we did shortly. So at Council's direction, we were asked to do a survey. We initially were only going to do it online. However, we had several citizens that called in that did not have access to the internet and started calling their vote in via phone. So we expanded the survey to include phone in, and we had a dedicated line, and we also printed it in the Star Tribune for people who weren't aware of it and could send in. So we took the survey 3 ways: online, via phone, and also print. Madam Clerk, would you allow me to share my screen? So we had a total of 1,700 people respond, 1,746 people respond. 1,500 of them were Casper residents, and here's how it breaks down. 1,480 were online, 142 were phone in, and 124 were sorry about that, we're mail-in. Overwhelmingly, we gave them the 5 options that you asked for. So option 1 was to keep the depots and do not open the MRF, and we told them what the rate increase would be. Option 2 was remove the depots, do not open the MRF, and basically throw your recyclables away. Option 3 was to keep the depots open the MRF, and take a rate increase of $1.70, I believe it was. Option 4, remove the depots completely and just have the MRF at 30 cents per month rate increase. Option 5 was the same as option 4, which remove the depots, open the MRF, and with a 30 cents per month increase. But in addition, give them a $17 a month curbside. Overwhelming, you can see option 3 was the overwhelming choice at 67.34%. See if this works. I want to show you the So this is the City of Casper citizen response. You can see that out of the 1,500 responses of Casper citizens, you can see what they're going for here in the options. But here it is by wards. So here's Ward 1, what people chose. Here's Ward 2, what people chose. Here's Ward 3, what people chose. And then where it breaks out by wards is very interesting because we have almost a third and a third and a third. Of course, what we don't know is how many people live in each ward to know the percentage, but we had, of the respondents, a third were basically about from each ward. Very, very consistent. On the, if you want to look at the regional, because this is where we had people from all over the county, all the different entities, also called in, and we tracked that. We felt that it was important when we were asking ratepayers, which are the citizens of Casper, to increase their rates, that we know where people were from. So we had a total of 1,748 surveys. They came from, 88% were from Casper. We had 7.61 from Natrona County. We had bar none 1.49%, Mills 1.09%, Evansville 0.8%. And if they didn't give us an address, they were thrown out, if you will, of the Casper results. But we had 0.92% that did not give us their location. And again, the data is very consistent. 67% for Natrona County of what those residents wanted compared to 67% for the City of Casper. And I don't, can you see on the screen bar none? I can't see what you can see. That's just kind of an overview of what we did with the survey. Are there any questions you have on this part before Cindy answers other questions?
I don't think so. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, one of the things that, that the regional data was kind of indicated to me was that potentially our partners, our partner communities would need to consider the possibility of picking up a portion of these costs instead of allowing these costs to be borne exclusively by Casper ratepayers. And so as we go through this data, if you would kind of keep that in mind, you know, ultimately we'll need that kind of direction as well as to whether or not requesting that of our partner communities would be something that you would have some interest in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Kathy.
Yeah, I know we've got depots in Mills and Evansville. Are either one of those communities paying anything at this time towards the recycling program?
Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, my response would be that indeed they are not. And I would have to defer to Ms. Langston to kind of walk us through some of that finer detail. But indeed, you're hitting on the question as to whether or not that should continue or whatever, at least for me, in that's kind of the direction, at least in part anyway, that we're looking for this evening. So if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, if I can invite Cindy up to help me through that question, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
Your Honor, Carter, it is correct that Mills, Evansville, and bar none of them are paying currently. They actually own the infrastructure of the depots, but they do not pay the city of Casper for collection. I ran the numbers, and I do have how much I estimate each of them would have to contribute if they decided in their communities to keep their depots and have us collect them. When I looked at that, if they agreed and participated, it would be about 18 cents less off of that 170. And they're all a little different, so their costs are a little different. Like bar none recycles everything we do, but Evansville and Mills, they recycle less. So our collection times, trips per week are different, and I based it on their population, the total tonnage we collect. So I do have a number in mind, and they all have very good mechanisms for raising the revenue, just like us. So they all have trash collection, and they can raise their fees. It's going to be a similar percentage. It's about 9.95%. So they'll have to raise their rates for their customers to contribute to paying us. So there is a mechanism in place. So it would be a matter of their elected officials agreeing with our elected officials that they're going to pay us to actually collect it and then take out the contaminations and bail it and then give it to the broker. So it is my recommendation that we do that because it's been 10 years or more that we've provided that service free of charge. So I think it's a good time to bring that subject up with the other communities.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Langston, is it fairly safe to assume that if we open this MRF, that then our recyclables will indeed start being recycled instead of ultimately just ending up in the landfill? Because that's what I want to avoid is, I want to see our stuff recycled. I don't want to see it taking a ride to Denver and then coming back and going into the landfill.
Your Honor, Councilman Huber, absolutely. That $1.70 that I'm saying per month includes costs to have people take out the contamination and make us one of the best organizations to buy the materials from. So the broker who works with iron and steel here locally is really excited because he knows our products will be super clean. And he actually recommended that we start taking paperboard, which is the cereal boxes, the most common one. But some of them are milk cartons, the non-plastic kinds, those kind of things that we would recommend if you go with option 3, that we change out glass and put in paperboard because it's very popular. We learned during this survey with all the comments that cereal boxes and paperboard people would like to recycle. And he has two great buyers who make insulation, and they use the paper material to do that. So it absolutely, all the commodities we collect would be recycled.
Councilman Kathy.
Mr. Mayor?
No.
Go ahead with whoever was wanting to speak, and then we can come back to me.
Thank you. This is Ken. Just out of curiosity, was Casper residents being charged at all for the recycling depots within Casper at all? Or was that free, was that currently free of charge during that time, similar to the other communities?
So, Your Honor, Councilman Bates, actually the city of Casper pays for our recycling program. It's just a perception that it's free. It's in their monthly trash rates currently.
Was it in the other communities' rates as well, though?
No, it was not. That's why I'm recommending we change that.
Councilman Kathy, go ahead. I'm waiting for the screen to come back so I can actually see who's raising their hand. But Councilman Kathy, go ahead.
So basically, the Casper residents have been paying roughly between $600,000 and $700,000 a year for the recycling program for the entire county. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Your Honor, Councilman Kathy, the actual operational cost per year is $226,272. We calculated that a year and a half ago, so it's slightly up from that. The $600,000 figure is what we have spent in capital improvements at the depot sites in the last few years, and the capital costs are not included in that operational annual cost.
Okay, I misunderstood it because the other evening I thought you said it was costing us about $600,000 and some thousand a year to operate, and we were only getting back about $60,000 in revenue. So I apologize for my misunderstanding. But as a follow-up to that, I had to clear my throat there. But as a follow-up to that, do you see any blowback, I guess would be a reasonable term, from any of the outlying communities on them paying us for recycling, similar to what we have had with animal control?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat that?
Well, basically, I know Mills and Evansville have both felt that we have been charging for animal control, we have been charging too much. And they are thinking of setting up their own systems, doing whatever their own way. Do you see a similar reaction to us now trying to charge them for the recycling that we're looking at doing?
Your Honor, Councilman Kathy, I don't, but let me tell you why I don't. is because they would have to get their own recycling truck, their own people, and their own material recovery facility to do that. And right now, we're all broke. And so I don't think they have the money to do that. So the most cost-effective way for them to actually provide this service, continue to provide it, is to have us provide it. So I truly think there might be a little bit of negotiation in the numbers that I picked, and they might decide, like bar none, they recycle all their or all the recycling commodities. They might decide, oh, well, maybe we're not going to recycle plastics anymore, just the other commodities. So they might negotiate to lower their costs on what they have to pay us, but I really don't think any of them will start their own companies to actually collect it and sort it and broker it. I just don't believe they'll do that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Manager, I guess what we have on the table, we obviously have all the options, but overwhelmingly the city or the citizens have 67%, I believe it was, have picked option 3, which was a rate increase of $1.70 roughly per month, and to keep the recycle depots open and open up the MRF.
Mr. Mayor, that basically is the question. The other question that I would enjoy hearing from Ms. Langston too, although I know she just went to sit down, is when in fact she would recommend the facilities being reopened and getting that service back online, even if it is in advance of the rate process being deliberated by the council, if you don't mind.
Sure. Ms. Langston.
Council members, if you give us the thumbs open that you're going to keep the depots open, it'll take us about 2 weeks, maybe faster. Andrew was hoping in a week, but things always don't happen as fast as you'd like them to, but we were hoping in a week or two. So what I've been telling the public is if you guys gave us the thumbs up, we would try to open them up by June 15th. At the very latest. So hopefully, like mid next week, if you give us the thumbs up, we could start working on it tomorrow.
Okay. I'll come right back to you, Councilman Cathy. Councilman Pacheco first.
Yeah, I just want to express my support for that and the option, obviously, that was overwhelmingly supported by the city, but also want to support the recommendation from Cindy for us to do charge that to the other municipalities, and it just makes sense. And I think that it's reasonable, and it's reasonable to the residents in those other communities, and I just want to be able to express that. So thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
The one thing that I did want to bring up is that I realized where the survey said, but the thing that I want to emphasize is that basically those that are passionate are the ones that will respond. The rest of the community will be ambivalent and they won't respond. And what I want to use as an example of that is if you remember when the city had to have the vote on smoking or not, that less than 7,000 people voted in that citywide election. And in the previous general election, over 7,000 people voted just in Ward 3. So just remember that only the passionates responded to this survey. And you need to remember that when you look at what you want to do now.
Councilman Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo what Councilman Cathy just said. I think that there is some danger there's a real big danger in making decisions based on survey results, because as Councilman Cathy just correctly stated, only the passionate respond to surveys. In this case, though, my support does happen to coincide with option 3. I think it's the best option. I'd really like to see us try to keep going down the recycling road as much as we can. And I think this that option allows us to try to continue to build on the success of the program that we've had so far, and hopefully get it to where these things are actually being recycled instead of just ending up in the landfill.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that it was thrown out there that it's going to be possibly $1.70 per month increase, but then it was also mentioned that it possibly would be a 18-cent decrease with adding the other cities to it, or So would it stay the $1.70 or $1.52? I know that's only 18 cents, but in reality, every penny counts for some people that do still like to recycle. So I'm just wanting the clarification. Would it actually be the $1.52 or $1.70, or are we not sure yet?
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Bates, if council indeed directs staff this evening that the municipalities have to pay to play, so to speak, with the recycling program from now on, I think Ms. Langston is representing that would mean the subsidy value and impact for the rate that we would propose could have a favorable impact, and therefore the $1.70 that we've been quoting kind of assumes that we would be in the subsidy business for the rest of the communities here forward. So if council tells us that the pay-to-play scenario is in effect for the other cities and towns, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cities and towns are going to be forced into a rate scenario, but that rather they'd have the option in order to continue recycling services with the city. They would have to pass along a rate to their citizens, and thereby our ratepayers, the ratepayers of Casper, would not have to bear that exclusively from now on.
Councilman Hopkins. Oh, said his name and he went. Well, I guess while we're waiting for Councilman Hopkins to come back on, I'll give my 2 cents on it. I'm in favor of the $1.70. A lot of people I've talked to just out and about, or that do recycle, are adamant that we keep the recycle depots in place, and they have no problem in paying the extra money. As far as, I appreciate the fact that we have the portal and that we can ask the citizens their viewpoint, and I think it's very important that we put it out there, and whether I'd rather take the citizens' viewpoint on this, and obviously you can look at the charts, and it's spread across the board evenly through all the wards, and it's overwhelming. It's not like everybody just came in and was just passionate about, hey, keep the depots here, this is what we need. There's overwhelmingly that's what a majority of them wanted, but there's others in there that picked other options. But it's very important that we do have the input from the citizens, and we're not just making decisions based on what collectively 9 of us know. I'd rather hear it from the citizens, and I've talked to the brokers that are the middleman to the brokers that pick up all the recycling from us and sell it to them, and it's important to them. So I like the process that's in place for it, and I like being able to have citizen input the way we got it on this one. So I'm in favor of keeping them open. It's $1.70, and overwhelmingly what I've heard from people is they don't have a problem in paying that amount. So I'm good with it. Councilman Hopkins, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry. Somehow I got pitched offline for a minute, but I agree. I mean, when you got 2/3 of your folks that really want to do this and they want to pay $1.70, that's no big deal to me. But the one thing I would ask is that 2 things I would ask. One of them is that this $1.70 keep pace with the actual cost of doing it. The second thing is stop buying bottled water. Your tap water is really good stuff. Thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
Well, I will not jump on that bandwagon for option 3. I guess basically you have 1,700 people out of 55,000 that are willing to pay $1.70. I wonder how many people out there would just as soon pay the 30 cents and go ahead and go to the MRF, or pay an outside contractor if this is so lucrative. And the other thing is this to me appears to be a slippery slope that we're ultimately headed towards option 5, which will be $17 a month. And I think there are a lot of people within Casper that they really don't want to be paying $17 a month. So I guess I am not in favor of that, and I realize it's the least popular option, but we went through all of this even with grass recycling, that people just weren't really willing to do that. And anyhow, that's my 2 cents worth.
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cathy brings up a great point. The data that I would suggest we really didn't get to evaluate very closely is certainly that curbside piece. Indeed, what that one option was meant to indicate was that if an optional service of curbside were available, that option to be selected would be $17. The reality is, if we were to socialize the entire cost of a curbside program, that would actually be significantly less per person or per household. So I didn't want to the data that staff presented to be misleading, but even though that's not really the question this evening, that's certainly what we have found if we were, to go that direction for curbside, just for clarity purposes. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess that brings us back around to, right now, the overwhelming response has been to go with option 3. And okay, Councilman Cathy.
Just one quick comment. You all noticed that I just got on the phone. I just called my business partner. He's paying $100 a year for curbside recycling. So they come to his house, they pick it all up, they take it off, and take it to the city. So even our $17 a month is more expensive than what you can get a private company to come to your house for. So just thought I'd throw that out.
Councilman Cathy, $100 per year it is you live in this community?
He lives on 14th Street, right here in Casper. And I believe that's the company that the firefighter and his wife are running.
$100 per year.
Could we have Ms. Langston, city manager, address that?
Your Honor, council members, the Casper curbside in our community charges $15 a month, and the reason I put $17 a month is if we actually contracted with them to provide the service for the city of Casper, we would do the marketing and the billing. And the lower fee to subsidize it, as Carter mentioned, was $5 per household. And we took that option out because we didn't think people were ready to pay $5 even a month right now in the economy. So the person who said $100 a year, they are not correct. If it's a residence. If it's a company that's asking for curbside, I don't have their curbside rates for, they pick up paper mostly, and cardboard for different offices, but the residential is $15 per month for curbside with the private sector in our community.
Well, I personally, doing the math on that, I'd rather pay $20 and do it at $1.70 per month to recycle than pay somebody $100 to pick it up at my curb, but that's me. So I guess that brings us back to, there's 3 options on the board. I guess let's do it that way. I don't know, I don't have them right in front of me, but I guess as far as the options go, we can go through them one by one and get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or we can go with the recommendation that's on the table. Does anybody have a suggestion of which way they'd like to go?
Hold up however many number of fingers is your preferred option.
Mr. Mayor, I think I'm the only one that's for anything other than option 3, so there's no point in going through a vote.
Vice Mayor, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like option 3, but I like option 3 with potentially charging the outer communities as well.
Sure. Okay, and I would agree with Councilman Kathy. It looked like there was a majority of the hands are going for option 3. So putting option 3 on the table with having the outside communities paying their fair share from this point forward, and reopening the depots within a week or 2. Am I missing anything on that? Okay, so option 3 it'd be $1.70 increase, roughly. Outside agencies paying their fair share, and we'll open the depots within the next 2 weeks. All those, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that. Okay. Looks like I got thumbs up from everybody except for Councilman Kathy, and I can't tell on Councilman Johnson, but we have enough thumbs up. So that's the direction it will move. And a thumbs up. Okay. Anything else on that, Mr. City Manager? Okay. We will move on to capital budget follow-up. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I just wanted to give council an opportunity to weigh in on the capital agenda, as it were. Certainly, council spent a lot of time on this, and given the amount of information and the multiplicity of spreadsheets that we provided the last time we had this discussion, I was a little worried that we might have confused the matter more than we needed to. So we gave you a real clean spreadsheet here that just goes right down the list of what it is that we think needs to be done from a prioritized ability to fund, if you will, with dollars on hand, the projects we'd like to tackle during the next fiscal year. I don't know that we need a whole lot of discussion. I just wanted to be doubly sure that you knew what direction we were going, given the possibility that we might have confused the issue the last time around on this matter. And that was all I had. Any questions or directions, Mr. Mayor, we'd be open to.
Anybody with questions or direction?
Fair enough. Thank you.
Looks like everybody's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to partner agency funding follow-up, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, this is also an opportunity to be sure council's comfortable with the direction we're moving with respect to funding our partner agencies. One of the things that we didn't get the opportunity to really clarify was as it relates to those that aren't social services necessarily, but still receive some, modicum of funding from the city, whether it be through 1% funds or general fund funds, special programming funds through the general fund. Without a doubt, council weighed in as it relates to the social services pretty clearly, I think. And we are moving in that direction as it relates to preparing the budget. We also reported that we think we have a pretty good arrangement with our special programming kinds of partners, being specifically Advanced Casper and the Health Department. In the meantime, Mr. Attorney Henley has been working with the UW Extension Office and the agreement that we are putting together with them moving into the new year, and discussing, you know, the funding that is 1 cent funding to that entity as well. Tonight, we again just wanted to touch on the topic with you just to make sure you're good with where we're going. If you had any other questions that we could address, or other partnerships that potentially we need to consider differently, anything of the above, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pacheco.
Carter, have you guys had a chance to reach out to a lot of those partner agencies and just have conversations with them and just what their feedback is? I support this 100%. I get it. I understand it. It's not, you know, not obviously ideal, but we're dealing with what we have to deal with. But what are you kind of getting from them in this conversation, the ones that you've had to talk to, or had a chance to talk to?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pacheco, we have really received a lot of, I don't want to say favorable, because nobody likes the direction we need to go, that's for sure, but a willingness to participate and partner to the extent that they can. Again, I really appreciate the response that we've gotten. Again, calling it favorable is hard to do, but certainly with respect to their willingness to play ball and be a team player and so forth, while gritting their teeth, recognizing that it all hurts, it generally has been the response. Some of the contractual conversations have been a little more difficult, wherein we've got different agreements with different entities and larger amounts of money. That's been a little more challenging, but nonetheless, the same spirit of trying to play ball, as it were, has been really refreshing, although I'm sure not easy. Thank you. You know.
Any other comments or questions? Vice Mayor Lutz.
So I have had a handful of agencies reach out to me about this. Who should I direct them to, Carter?
I couldn't quite hear the question, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that, Vice Mayor? I think you said you had a couple people reach out to you.
Yes, sorry. I had a handful of agencies reach out to me directly about this. Who is it best at the city to direct them to?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, if they wouldn't be opposed to reaching out to our office, I'd be happy to visit with them. And if there are questions that I'm having a hard time answering, we'll get other people involved. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I think the attorney wanted to add something with respect to the conversations he's been commandeering, if we could.
Okay, Mr. Henley.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The only one that I'm really familiar with and have been involved in the negotiations at all is with the University of Wyoming for the extension professional. And that was something that we had engaged them early on. And boy, we've had a difficult time even negotiating this year's contract with them. And so as of today, I think that we have an agreement with them, which will basically be concluded at the end of June. So it's just been a very long haul and difficult negotiation with them. A lot of it was not over the amount, but over just the terms of the contract and getting, we had sent something down and it sat on somebody's desk for, 3.5 months or something like that, or was getting circulated. I don't know. But in any event, so I'm not 100% sure how this contract will end up going this year. For fiscal year 21. So I don't know if the University of Wyoming will be willing or to carry forward with that or not. On the other hand, I think the person that we employ or contract with is up here, and so it would make some good financial sense for that relationship to continue. But again, I don't know where it comes down.
Any questions, comments? All right, Mr. City Manager. Okay. Move on then to budget session follow-up, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is the opportunity to deal with any lingering questions that council may have with respect to major tenets and facets of the budget as we delivered it last week. And so if there are lingering questions or pieces of information that don't make sense, now that you've had a week or so to sort of evaluate and consume the information, we would really enjoy the opportunity to answer those questions, in that we are kind of in the final stages of needing the information in order to prepare the budget for formal consideration coming up in June. So I wanted to give this some time on the agenda, if we could, to answering any of those outstanding questions or need for information.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you. I wanted to propose this to council and see what you guys think, and maybe, I know some people don't care for the surveys, but I've had a lot of people not happy about us looking at closing down the swimming pools if we were able to open them up. The cost of it, I understand why we need to shut them down due to the cost, but just the amount of people that have spoke that they wanted open, that they need a place for kids to go to, and this being part of the budget, I guess proposing an idea to council is putting out a survey if the pools can be open, doing a higher pay increase for this year, and then we can look at it for next year. But if the people want it open, then let's charge higher to swim if it's going to be open, or a survey people aren't willing to pay the increase and we just need to not open them up and save the city that money. So I wanted to ask what council thought of that. I know a lot of people are not happy that they heard that we're going to be closing the pools this summer if it's our choice.
I'd like to comment back to Councilman Bates real quick. I think if you look across the country right now, and more close to home, you look at Denver and places like Waterworld and things like that, they're not opening up, and they won't open up until next year. You've really got to weigh the cost that goes into running a pool, to fill them, to maintain them, to have your employees there. And in the current state that we're in right now, you're allowed one kid or one person per lane. So go divide up every swimming pool we have into lanes, and you can probably get about 4 kids in there. And that is not gonna, you can't charge them enough money to make it even break even at this point in time until things change. So I know people are upset and people are not happy about the fact that the pools may not be open, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to open them up. We have to be able to put enough people in them to make it feasible to even have them open. And you got to look at the big picture. You got to look at the people that do it for a living. And I bring Waterworld up as a clear example. Clearly, we don't have anything like that here. But if the people that do it for a living are not going to open this year and they're not going to make a dime this year, how can we be any different than them? You have to be able to. You can't sink any more money into a loss at this point in time. Anybody else have any? Councilman Hopkins. Of course we couldn't. We almost made it through the night. Councilman Hopkins, I need you to turn your mic on.
Sorry, I keep forgetting my clicker here. I concur with your thinking, Mr. Mayor. There's just no way we can keep reasonable separation in a swimming pool for a bunch of kids playing in there. I would like to keep the spray pads open if we can work a way to do that, if we can get barriers up around the pool. But to have the pools open is just not practical, and I realize we'll catch a lot of flack over that, but we'd be one of the very few people in the world that are opening pools to the public. So, thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Yeah, we know that sometimes making difficult decisions are not always popular, and I think that in a case like this is where we are sitting squarely at a unprecedented budget shortfall, and I'm not going to use that word lightly. I'm going to use that, and not even figuratively. I think that we have to make some tough decisions, and this is what we were elected for. And sometimes those decisions aren't popular. And I'm a huge youth advocate. That's what I do for a living. As a teacher, I do everything. I'm a huge, and this hurts bad for me because I want to be able to open up those pools for kids. But we are sitting in an unprecedented time, and people keep asking, well, what can you cut here? What can you do here? And this is tough, and it's not easy, and we're going to get hit. We're going to have people that are going to say things, and there are going to be some people that are going to be pretty mean about it. But I'm asking the community, and I'm asking the city of Casper to understand that we are trying to figure out a budget that's going to be able to continue to be solvent and to move forward. And we're trying to support our city manager and our staff. The beautiful thing about it too is that this can be a minor inconvenience. And I say that not because some people will sit and say, well, every summer, my kids has done this and we do these things. There are bigger things for us to be worried about in our lives, I think. And this is a minor inconvenience, and we will be open next summer. We'll be moving forward, but I think this is something that we've got to support our city staff on and look forward to say these are the tough choices we've got to make.
If I can I'm going to segue on the back of what Councilman Pacheco just said. I think that what I would hope people would understand is that the city is no different than the family that's been out of work for the last 2 or 3 months, or the person that hasn't been getting a paycheck. City hasn't either. We have events that get shut down. The economy shuts down. People are not spending money. The money is just not coming in. And when it's not there, we still have bills to pay like everybody else. And we've got to be able to keep this all afloat. And so along with it, we have got to cut. I'm sure plenty of people in their own personal lives have cut the necessities out, what they feel are necessities. Maybe somebody's foregone a gym membership, or they've decided to cut cable out of their life because you can't afford it and you got to pay the bills. This is no different. This is us as a city household, if you will, that we have to cut the amenities out at the moment that we just can't afford. We can't afford to keep them open until we get the bills paid. And so it's probably the dumbest analogy in the world, but it's the best way of looking at it. Is we have got to watch our budget just like people have got to watch their budget at home. So, any other questions or comments? Councilman Cathy.
Yes, this is off of the pool subject, but on the pool subject, yes, we have to look at the overall budget constraints. But one thing that I had for the city manager, I had noticed in going through the budget that there was quite a discrepancy in the percentage of increases for health insurance. And that had surprised me because I did not notice as much difference in personnel. But in one department or even sub-department, I might see a 5% health insurance increase, and in the next one there would be 170% health insurance increase. And so I was wondering if I could get a bit of an explanation on that.
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councilman Kathy. I appreciate the observation. The disparities can be quite varying with regard to each cost center that you might be looking at. And generally speaking, that is with respect to the type of selection that the individual may have chosen in that particular cost center. For example, if you got a department or a division or a particular work area that has a number of single individuals who aren't as worried about insurance coverage, they're going to select the least cost type alternative that has a smaller cost impact to the employer, or in this case the city of Casper. Whereas if you look at others who have larger families in a particular division, they're going to select a more expensive coverage because they're worried about, making sure they have maternity care, making sure they have care for their kids and dependents and everything else. And that has a cost implication to the city that might be greater than other divisions, if you will. I'd be happy, though, Councilman Kathy, to take a conversation with you offline to make sure we're not missing the ball on something that may have been a miscalculation as well, because there's certainly a possibility that exists. But what I would remind council is we are looking at a $730,000 cost increase to the employer to provide this plan, and that will bear out in the operational lines that you see in contradiction to a number of cost, even personnel lines that are dropping. Those lines are going to go up.
I appreciate it, Mr. Manager. Yes, I was expecting them to go up. It was just surprising, and I hadn't thought about what you had mentioned about the differences between single and married and kids, etc. So maybe I'll figure out a time in the next few days to try to swing by and we can sit down and take a look at it. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Carter, first off, I really like the pay-as-you-go plan that you put in place. I think that's a smart way to do this right now as far as the capital projects. We talked about how we may need to make budget adjustments as we move through the year because things are so uncertain. To what extent do you feel prepared for more serious challenges should Councilman Kathy's concerns come to fruition and the hit is a more serious hit than we anticipated?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, I appreciate the question. The staff team and myself have already started evaluating more draconian measures with regard to the budget that may need to be taken. And so if we start to see a troubling trajectory that we didn't anticipate or that was, more egregious than we anticipated, it's our plan to come to you in advance of that, worse downfall, if you will, or shortfall, I should say, to provide recommendations that would curb expenses to trend more closely with a trajectory that's more aggressive. So while I couldn't tell you what that is right now, we have started that process to evaluate ideas and be prepared to get the council in the loop to help us decide which of those measures are most appropriate.
Thank you. Let's hope we don't, but that is reassuring that you're having those conversations.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, and members of the council, we clearly have some measures in this budget that are, you know, not good and uncomfortable and awful. And unfortunately, you know, the possibility exists that worse conditions may present themselves for us. One of the things that I think I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring up is with respect to the wage freezes. That clearly is an unpopular item with regard to our employees and certainly unpleasant for me to even recommend. One of the things that you should be aware of is with respect to the effective date. We do have data that would suggest if we bumped the effective date up from July 1 to June 1, that the FY21 budget would incur additional savings of $120,000 for the year. Certainly I realize that that's not real appealing to consider because the original option is difficult enough to consider. But like I said, I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't identify that to you and get your direction one way or the other.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With reference to a potential wage freeze being effective June 1st, looking at the calendar, is that even something that we could do if we were to want to? I don't see when we'd be having a meeting before then that we could do that, even if we wanted to do that. And I don't mean want, but even if we were to deem it to be necessary.
Mr. Mayor, the one way that we could do that, Councilman Huber, is by virtue of an amendment to the budget. And indeed, if we got tacit approval this evening, we could have ratifying approval with respect to that amendment. That'd be one way to do it. The reality is, as it relates to the curtailment of expenses and so forth, an amendment may not even be necessary, really. But that certainly be a formal step that we could take.
Any other thoughts from council on wage freeze, moving it up to June 1st? Councilman Bates.
I have a question regarding it, but before we make a decision, but I think it would have to be I don't know. Never mind. Sorry.
Councilman Huber.
Well, Mr. Mayor, you know, I don't like cutting people's wages any more than anybody. I really, truly do not have a stomach for that. But I just think it's inescapable that the budget problems that we're facing, you know, Carter used the word draconian. That's what I see coming over the horizon. I think that we should proceed with this at this point, and it's something that it just makes me sick to have to say that. But I think we're going to have to be making these kind of decisions from now on. And unfortunately, I just don't see a good, shiny picture here. And so I would suggest that we go forward with this wage freeze as a first step in the direction that I'm afraid we're going to have to go. And that it be effective June 1.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with what Councilman Huber is saying. Nobody likes to do this, but quite honestly, it's an administrative decision. However, we as council are responsible for the entire budget. And I think if we have to do this, I think we should proceed with it. Because we've got to balance the budget. And again, I don't like to balance the budget on the backs of our employees, but we do have a lot of other people out there that are a little wounded too. And some of us are in fact wounded, but I think we need to proceed with it. So I concur with the recommendation to do so. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
The other thing I'd say, The other thing I'd say is obviously nobody enjoys a wage freeze. We don't enjoy it any more than anyone else. But I guess what I would just remind people of is every economic shift happens constantly. And so if you remember the last wage freeze that was put into place, once we were in a better economic decision, then council made the decision to basically backfill the time period and then bring it up to date and reinstate the wage steps. And so I guess I would just emphasize that it's temporary until, better economic times.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you. Carter, would the decision have to be made like tonight and implemented June 1st, or is there a chance that we can, does it have to be June 1st, or can we postpone it to discuss it a little bit more?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, if council would rather hold on that decision tonight, that absolutely is a possibility. You bet.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we probably should go ahead with June 1st. Our employees are adults. They understand the circumstances we're in. I don't think they'll be surprised. They'll be disappointed, of course. But I guess I'd also like to point out that we're asking these nonprofits that we provided support to tighten their belts. And sometimes that it feels like you do that and, they just find a way to reduce their budget. Well, what you're really talking about is eliminating positions and programs when support for those nonprofits is reduced. And so, this is about trying to spread that responsibility, that pain, if you want to use that term, in a responsible way. And none of us take any pleasure in this. We've all done what we can when we were in a better position to provide bonuses and salary increases. And hopefully our employees will understand and believe that when we're in a better position, we'll continue those practices and try to make things right for them. But I would rather overshoot right now and be in a position where maybe we can make up that ground later, rather than hope for the best and find out later that we have to do things that are, again, to use that word, more draconian in nature. So I support moving quickly on this and starting with the reduction, the freeze, June 1st.
Councilman Bates, did you have something else?
Yeah, I just ask that we just hold off. I asked council just to hold off if at June our next meeting, in the pre-meeting, we go ahead and say, yeah, we can do it. Great. I'm not totally against it. I just personally need some clarification, I guess, from Carter that I'd like to discuss with him first before council makes this decision, just that we look at everything that budget-wise we have been discussing since we started talking about budgeting and the different cuts and things that we've had to do in the budget. So I just ask that council holds off until June, our next June meeting, and then if I guess Carter says, yeah, let's go with it, I'm fine with that. I need some clarification before we do, if council would be willing to, and if Carter and the staff would be willing to wait.
Councilman Huber.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just feel the need to once again remind everybody that no decision is final until it's voted on in an open meeting. These thumbs up, thumbs down things that we do are just a kind of a consensus to know what direction people are kind of thinking at this point. And so, again, no decision is final until it's voted on in an open meeting. But I do think we need to move forward with this, and I just hate having to say that. And I think that if we don't move forward with it, June 1, we're missing an opportunity there.
Mr. Manager, I guess I'll just reiterate a couple things that you and I talked about. I did hear from a few of ours internally that some concerns as to the furlough as far as it goes. That is across the board for everybody within the city. They would, according to their pay structure, furlough no matter what position you're in for the amount of days compared to the amount of money that a person actually, or the salary that they get. And then the second question that was brought up, and I know it comes back more to a staffing issue than anything else, but making employees take a furlough day, the question was asked as to whether they could pick that day and make it a 3-day weekend on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or a Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Obviously, some portions of our organization are bigger than would allow us to allow that many people go, but I just put those out there and just kind of reiterate what we had talked about.
Mr. Mayor, I can absolutely appreciate the opportunity to leverage a weekend or whatever with regard to these days off. Generally speaking, furlough days are assigned, and they're not like vacation days where you get to, just submit for requests and that kind of thing. But I don't have any problem suggesting that as much as we can, having those days be advantageous to the employee as they're assigned. I don't see that being a problem. Certainly with regard to the larger departments and divisions that we have in the organization, that becomes more challenging. But as you and I discussed, there's a lot of Fridays and Mondays between July 1 and December 31 that we can work with. And Tuesdays as it relates to those Monday holidays between, now and then. So we'll do everything in our power to make those assignments as helpful as possible. You bet.
And I guess just one last follow-up comment, and I guess kind of along the lines of what Councilman Bates is saying is that, we're 3 days away from June 1st and making a decision to implement this now. I get that time is of the essence and we've got to cut, but I really feel like at this point in time, we're furloughing employees, we're freezing wages, we're hitting our employees really hard. So I would, and I agree with Councilman Huber that nothing's done until it's voted on, but if we could take this next week just to really, and I know you guys have, you've done an excellent job in looking at the budget, but if we could possibly comb through everything possible to see if there's any cuts we can take anywhere else to where we're not hitting our employees so hard, I would appreciate that. And if, you know, at the end of the day, if that's where we have to go and what we have to do, then it is what it is. But I'd rather do a last-ditch effort, if you will, of making sure that we don't have some other place that we can take it from and not necessarily take it from our employees. Okay, any other comments or questions from anybody? Okay, Mr. Manager, is anything else we need on this?
So, Mr. Mayor, I guess the question arises for me, does council want to revisit this then in pre-meeting as Councilman Bates suggested, or what would council like to see on this matter?
Okay, I'll ask that question in a moment. Councilman Cathy, did you have something else?
Yes, the one thing I would like to suggest is, I know when we used to have our meetings downtown all the time, we could look and see the graph of where we had projected and what our actual tax collections have been. Would it be possible to get the latest update of that particular graph?
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so I guess the question comes back to is council wanting to move forward on this tonight, or do we want to give it until pre-meeting next week to do a little bit more research and then have that decision made in pre-meeting next week? And Councilman Pacheco.
I don't think it would hurt anything to wait a few days to do that. So I'm going to support that. I know the urgency behind it, and I hear it. But I think a few days is okay to do that. And I don't want to misinterpret Carter's. It seemed to me that he would be willing to broker, you know, that it'd be okay to wait a few days. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Carter, at all. And I don't want to put you into a corner because I don't like doing that. But I think it'd be okay for us to maybe wait a few days to kind of digest a little bit more and then maybe come back and look at a few things too. So I'll support that.
So are we good in waiting a few days? And Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just point of clarification. I guess this is for Carter. If we wait, are we spending $180,000? Or how long do we wait and not have that option to save that? If I heard this correctly.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Powell, I guess what I would suggest in order to balance that conversation would be that, you know, until the pre-meeting on Tuesday night, we would hold those potential increases that would have occurred between the 1st and the evening of Tuesday night. The date escapes me at this point. Until we get direction definitively from the council Tuesday night in pre-meeting. And then according to that, we just respond to whatever his council would like to direct. If that's fair. I mean, if that sounds okay to you.
I guess for clarification, we wouldn't be able to move on anything until it was voted on anyways, correct? So would that give us between now and pre-meeting on Tuesday does that give us this time frame, or by us waiting, are we missing a window of a few days?
Mr. Mayor, I think we can still take advantage of the majority of those funds, particularly if you're okay with us holding any of those increases that would have occurred between tonight, or the 1st, I should say, and Tuesday night in pre-meeting. We'll still be able to take advantage of those cost savings if council sees fit to do so.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing I can tell you is when you see a storm coming, you batten down the hatches. We know that we're not going to have a good tax month, and we know that June's not going to be good. So it makes no sense not to act beforehand. And it's only a difference of a few bucks, whether it's June 1 or June 4th, but we know the situation is not going to get better in a week. So let's just go ahead and get her done. Thank you.
I think our next meeting is June 2nd.
June 2, okay.
June 2. Okay, so would council prefer to wait until pre-meeting the next week, or would you rather just move on it tonight? So I guess we'll do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
I was going to say, let's do a thumbs up for moving on tonight, or a thumbs down would mean that we wait until the pre-meeting.
Okay. So thumbs up. We do it. We take care of it tonight. Thumbs down. Okay, Councilman Cathy.
Don't we need to go ahead and make thumbs up or thumbs down, as Councilman Huber said tonight, so that we can get it on the agenda for next Tuesday night rather than waiting for the pre-meeting?
Pre-meeting. That's what we were doing. Was thumbs up is tonight. Thumbs down is wait till pre-meeting next week.
Let's have a vote in the regular meeting, though.
We wouldn't need to vote in the regular meeting, except in the budget.
Okay. All right, so we've got, I'm sorry, so we're discussing in council here, so one more time, give me your thumbs up or a thumbs down. Well, it looks like 5-4, so I guess you're moving forward tonight. Okay. Anything else on budget? All right, we will move forward or move on to reopening of city facilities. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The other thing we need to visit with you about tonight is with regard to the strategy that we've envisioned and put together as it relates to reopening city facilities. Some of those questions have been answered to some degree as it relates to partial openings and that kind of thing. I'm thinking of the rec center in particular. However, there's a number of other strategies we need to take with other city facilities that council would need to be comfortable with in terms of, you know, how indeed the varying levels of safety come or go in our community and our county, and what our interface with the public looks like accordingly. So with that, we wanted to kind of go over with you what our thoughts were. If council has specific directives that you would like staff to take into consideration as it relates to putting this plan into effect, that would be the opportunity tonight. Or if in fact council would want to think about it further and come back to it in a work session format again, or whatever, we can do that too. We just didn't want to get ahead of council with regard to what we're thinking about as it relates to opening City Hall, for example, and how we do that, or as it relates to opening the Fort Casper Museum and how that looks and everything else. So with regard to that, Ms. Lopez and Tracy Belser have done a lot of work here in putting these thoughts together. The executive team has weighed in as how that could possibly look. Also, if I could, Mr. Mayor, turn some time over to Ms. Belser, Ms. Lopez to walk us through that, I'd sure appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go ahead. This is Zalima. Oh, you got it. I was going to turn it over to you, Zalima.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay. Thank you, City Manager.
Mr. Mayor and the rest of council. I appreciate the time to be able to talk to you a little bit about our ideas on the approach to opening or reopening our city facilities that have not been reopened to date. Hopefully, in reviewing the memo and the summary, you could see that we're really trying to take a thoughtful and careful approach to reopening our facilities for the safety of our customers as well as all of our employees. We definitely wanted to establish some objective criteria that we are using in consideration of reopening facilities, and these include whether or not state and local public health orders allow the reopening of certain facilities, the level of community risk we're experiencing. Right now, of course, we're in a moderate risk, level orange, the modality of service delivery, so where facilities have to be open to provide the services that they are meant to provide to our citizenry, and our ability to provide services through other contactless means. We also want to look at some data-driven criteria, such as a downward trajectory of documented cases of COVID over the last 14 days, stabilization of cases that indicate community spread. Of course, we want to consider our ability to meet or exceed all of the requirements of, local, state, national guidance on reopening businesses and best industry practices there. Ability to quickly and independently provide PPE to all of our employees so that we know that they will be protected with face coverings, with gloves, with sanitization methods. And then, of course, we would also consider whether or not we've had positive cases of employees or close family members within those facilities. So as we, move through the potential approach to reopening, really kind of divided city facilities into three main buckets or categories. The first one being those kind of special service facilities, those facilities that have to be open to provide their service, such as Fort Casper Museum, as indicated by the city manager. Others would include facilities such as our solid waste facilities that have been closed, our special waste facility, those kinds of places, Casper Aquatics facility, municipal court, Highland Park Cemetery, and again, Fort Casper Museum. So these are those really service-intensive facilities where people really need to be on site to be able to utilize those services. Then the second sort of group or category that we identified was our general service facilities. So these would be facilities such as City Hall and the Casper Service Center, where people interact and do business, but they don't necessarily have to come in and interact one-on-one, and if they do, it's fairly limited, and we could manage that pretty easily through appointments and such. Then the third sort of category of facilities that we identified are public safety facilities. So these are our fire stations, all of our treatment plant facilities, and the related utility infrastructure facilities, public safety communication center, and then police and fire administrative offices. The idea there being that we really want to protect these employees as much as we can from unnecessary exposure, from doing group activities that aren't necessarily one of the primary functions of that agency. So in categorizing these facilities, we decided that we could phase in opening based on all of the services provided in those facilities and the other criteria that we established. So we are proposing that in phase one, which happens during this sort of orange overall risk level, those special services facilities be allowed to open. During this phase one, we really want to emphasize, social distancing, face coverings for all employees. We want to encourage good hygiene, hand sanitizing, hand washing, encouraging people not to touch their faces and the use of face coverings and those kinds of things. All of the facilities would have very specific and somewhat strict infection mitigation controls that we are developing currently. So your summary doesn't include it, but our overall plan does list out specific mitigation strategies that each facility will have to undertake before they will be allowed to reopen to the public. We're also continually emphasizing the fact that employees should stay home if they're sick or symptomatic in any way, encouraging still in this phase remote work if possible, and then of course limiting those group interactions where possible to stay under what the mandated limits are for us. In phase 2, we loosen a little bit. We certainly keep many of the physical strategies in place to protect people, still encourage social distancing, a lot of the face coverings, but you know, we could increase the amount of people based on what the government orders are and those kinds of things. Phase 3, which would be under our normal risk, our new normal risk level, would allow those public safety facilities to open relatively safely. So that is our proposed strategy, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding specific plans or mitigation strategies that we are hoping to implement.
Any questions from anybody? Councilman Bates.
Mine's just more of a comment that I'd prefer to see is the limited group interaction, 10 or fewer on phase 1. I'd like to see that personally increase to the phase 2, the limited group interaction, 25 or fewer, and basically what the limited group of phase 2 be more of phase 1, and then set a different limited group for phase 2. I look at the amount of people that were interacting through this weekend at parks, at Alcova, up on the mountain, at the waterfalls, then people at Walmart and Menards and Home Depot and the different grocery stores. You have more than limit group. You have 10 people that are near each other in any one of those spots for even longer than 5 minutes. So even up at the mall, there's been quite a bit of people that's been up there around each other. So just me personally, I'd like to see what's on phase 2 to be phase 1, and then a new limited group change to 50, and then whatever. That's just my personal opinion. Yeah, that's it.
Councilman Pacheco.
Just a quick question. So when you were putting this criteria together, you guys based this upon CDC guidelines. You guys used the data, the information to create this based off of those guidelines to say this is phase 1, phase 2. So I guess what my point is you guys utilized scientific understanding of what would be the best practice for us to reopen our facilities. Would that be a correct statement?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pacheco, absolutely. We utilize guidances provided by the CDC, OSHA's guidance on preparing workplaces for COVID-19. We weighed heavily using the Natrona County phase guideline for the general public and businesses to maximize public health and economic recovery. Of course, that was their plan that they put out several weeks ago. And then, you know, we looked at all of those things and compared that to our city operations and the needs of our customers as well as our employees to put together this strategy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I share a lot of the concerns that Councilman Bates was voicing. You know, we have people gathering in great numbers and close proximity to each other in places like Walmart, the mall, those kind of places. You know, we can't control what goes on in those places. If they want to defy the health regulations. If people choose that's what they want to do, that, you know, they can do that. We can't control that. We do, however, have control over what goes on in city facilities in keeping our employees safe and keeping the people who come to transact their business in city facilities, keeping those people safe. And so I don't think we should be in any way motivated to lower our standards down to what some of these other places are doing. I think we should set a high standard, a high example, that we are interested in safety for everybody, and that's what we're going to try to achieve. And I really want to compliment the staff. I looked through this plan. I think it looks real good. It follows the health department guidelines as far as I could see, and that's what every entity should be doing.
Councilman Pacheco. Yeah,
and I guess my ambiguous statement that I made by asking those questions, or not a statement, but my questions, was basically, I think, what Councilman Huber was just saying, that I think it's, granted, right now, it's not popular to remain and try to stay somewhat conservative with your estimations and how we do that. And I think if the city can maintain to keep the employees safe and to be able to do that, I think it's safe to say that, you know, that we can have a little bit more of a conservative approach as we continue to do this and still function well for the city and still offer those things by offering, like I said, a little bit more conservative criteria to be able to do it. And I think it looks great. It's good that we had the CDC guidelines, health department guidelines. We're utilizing all those based upon data that we certainly need to use to make these decisions. So.
Any other comments? All right, Mr. City Manager, are we looking for, do you need direction to move forward, or?
Mr. Mayor, if council's prepared to deliver that tonight, or and so on, yes, we'd be happy to take that direction. We'd kind of use this to follow as our map, if you will, through these changing circumstances. Otherwise, if council would like to consider this further and maybe ask some more questions or get some more information, we'd be happy to do that too.
I guess one question that I would have is, obviously, a certain criteria, we move from one to the next. Are we basing that all off of where we stand with like state orders, and we'd move from one phase to the next as the state opens up?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's a fair assessment. For example, if we go to yellow condition here in this county, that would open up some opportunities for us to consider additional services and facilities to be open. And so, yeah, we would try to trend what it is that we would, do in terms of opening and increasing our citizen interactions face to face with respect to what the state directs, what the conditions that are declared would otherwise indicate.
Okay, so is everybody prepared to move forward on this tonight and allow the city to start reopening, or do you want more time or have questions that you need answered? If you're ready to move forward, let's give a thumbs up. If not, if you need more time, then give me a thumbs down. Okay, across the board. You bet. Okay, we will now move to council around the table. We'll start with Councilman Bates.
Thank you. The only thing I have to say is I'm just disappointed about the pool thing, that that's not an option. I apologize to the city that we won't be able to. I understand the reasons that everybody gave, but it's still, I understand for all those parents and kids, disappointment. So, other than that, that's all I have to say.
Councilman Johnson.
I just wanted to say that the economic ripple effect of this is going to be huge, and nobody's immune, including governments and government employees. Our unemployment rates, I think about 14.7 nationwide, but really it's closer to 20. So there are a lot of people that don't even have jobs. So it's prudent for the government to tighten its belt just as everybody else has done. It's unfortunate, but that's the world we're living in today.
Councilman Kathy.
I guess I would have to agree and reiterate what Councilman Johnson just said about the economy is I think a lot of people believe that this COVID is going to be gone and the oil prices are going to go to $50 a barrel, but they aren't. And even at the 32 or 33 you see for the WTI, Wyoming's prices are not that. They're still under 20. So you're not going to see a lot of movement. So I think Councilman Johnson hit the nail on the head. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Luce.
Yeah, no, I would like to make it clear, just because I know that this kind of got lost last time. We ourselves are not necessarily making the decision not to reopen the pools. It is still not allowed under state health guidelines. And so just make that clear. And then, yeah, I think everyone's already said all the things that I can say about the economic situation. So that's it.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have anything to add tonight, but I think it was a good session, considering it's still an electronic session. But I think we've done what needs to be done, and thank you all. Bye-bye.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really anxious to get back to where we can meet in person. I think that these sessions are as good as they can be when they're electronic, but they're not as good as meeting in person. I heard a quote today that I thought's worth repeating, and that is, "Believing the opposite of what facts prove is not thinking for yourself." I would just suggest that we all think about that quote for a while, and look forward to meeting with everyone next week and hope it can be in person.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Your Honor. The WHAM Board of Directors met last Thursday, and they did agree to reschedule the WHAM convention, the summer convention in Laramie next summer, where it was scheduled to be held this summer. The good news is that Mills has rejoined WHAM, which leaves Rock Springs as the only municipality in the state out of 99 towns and municipalities that is not a dues-paying member of WHAM, which is good. And they did begin work on the resolution process, and our suggestions are part of that conversation. And I'm trying to remember, Carter, is there anything else of note that you can recall from the WHAM meeting that I'm overlooking?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, there was some conversation with respect to the legislative session that took place in the board meeting. The bottom line was there's a possibility of some aid money, if you will, to cities and towns that would be included in the second iteration of federal dollars, kind of the second CARES Act, if you will, that's being debated currently in Washington. And hopefully that would mean some relief to cities and towns of our size and nature. But for now, the funding that we have available to us is really to reimburse expenses, which wouldn't be unwelcome either, just not as helpful as what may potentially be coming, and that's that was another big point, I think.
Thank you. And you know, we're all so tired of the seclusion and being separated. I just want to, again, I hate to be a negative voice about all of this because people are so happy to get out when the weather is nice and re-engage and enjoy the activities we all enjoy. Nothing has changed about this virus. It's just as deadly. It's just as contagious. It's just as omnipresent as it's been. And so as community leaders, I still think we need to be a voice of caution that this thing is still here. It's still killing people. We have been extremely fortunate in Wyoming and in our community in particular, and I hope that continues. But I think we collectively need to be a voice saying it's not over. And of course, our management of the city facilities, this plan, which I think is excellent, kind of makes that statement that we still need to be cautious. And if we have a serious problem in the not too distant future, it will be because people started to act like this wasn't really real or something that we needed to be concerned about any longer. We do. And so, again, as community leaders, I think we need to express those sentiments of caution and tell people it's still important to do the social distancing. It's still important to follow all the guidelines offered by our Department of Health and to be careful because we just are not, it still is not a resolved situation. Thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Not too much more. I don't want to repeat myself, but I know with the decisions that we're making with the budget that are not easy, they're difficult, but I think that I'm hoping and I'm praying that our community does understand the decisions that we are making are not always easy, and it's a combination, especially with the pool, a combination of fiscal and health as well. And so we have got to do what we think is in the best interest of our community. And so it's not always easy. And no one said being elected an official would be easy. So I appreciate everybody working hard and doing that. So anyway, that's all I got.
All right. And I just got a couple of things. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mr. City Manager, but I got a couple of questions that were asked to me today. Summer camp at the rec center. I'm assuming at this point in time, without with groups of 25 or more, has that been canceled altogether, or are we still looking to see where we're headed?
Mr. Mayor, I'm looking over the call list, and it looks like I do have Mr. Cortez here still. My understanding is that the allowance to get those camps open and come into play is not available to us right now. But if it's okay with you, could I get Tim to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Cortez, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. If, Mr. Mayor, Council, if you can hear me all right. We're kind of just in a holding pattern right now. We realize we have a lot of parents that really wondering if they got a place for their kids to land this summer. We're really waiting until June 1st to see what the governor's orders might change to. We've gotten with the local health department and the local infectious disease docs, and they basically said, you know, they're not interested in doing summer camps the way everything stands now, and really they're not too far off the mark with regard to how our staff feels as well, meaning with some of the restrictions and the group sizes so small, it makes it really tough to see us do anything meaningful with the kiddos. The other thing we are really keeping a close eye on, and I think we all have probably seen that good news, which was with regard to the daycare that had the positive that popped up in that facility, and then all the testing that was done. And I think that they're not having any more positives within that facility, I think gives a little more credence to us having a summer camp option. But right now we're just more in a holding pattern. We do have about 150 kids signed up as it stands. We've capped the we've capped the sign-up process just in case we do get put in a place where we have to do refunds. But we're still hoping right now that we'll have a good product for the community this summer.
Okay, and then while we have Mr. Cortez on, not to put anybody on the spot, but what are 4th of July celebration this year? Again, I know we're looking at, you gotta be able to have groups again, at the event center. It all depends on where we're at by that time, but we're a month away from it. So is there a possibility that if we did not, let's just say that nothing really changes or we don't get to where we can have large groups, is there a possibility of still having a fireworks show? And then obviously we're talking about cutting everything, so I would imagine any funding coming from the city would be slim to none. Would that come back to private donations in order to make that happen? And if so, what is the cost in order to do that? How much money would need to be gathered together in order to at least do an aerial show, not groundworks or anything else? If we couldn't have anybody there to see them anyways, what would those type of costs be?
Mr. Mayor, your question is very timely. Mr. Cortez and I had this conversation on Friday, I think it was, and indeed, the issue is with respect to funding, as well as the events that typically surround the fireworks show. I feel relatively comfortable in saying that being able to do correlating events in conjunction with the fireworks show is probably a no-go. But with respect to simply doing an aerial show, the issue would be funding. And Tim, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we talked about $25,000 or $30,000 to make the whole thing happen, if private donations were available to make that happen. Is that fair to say, Mr. Cortez?
Mr. Manager, Mayor, Council, that is the approximate number. I visited with Mr. Murphy after me and Carter's discussion on Friday. He thought that number would be somewhere around 23,000 to kind of make it a little more exact. And that is something that we would have to raise in one way, shape, or form. Obviously, private donations is probably the one that would be at the forefront, but we would need to know that by about June 6th. I think it was June 10th is what Mr. Murphy indicated would be the drop dead date, meaning that would be the last date. We either have to sign our agreement with the fireworks folks or decline it.
So if I'm hearing that right, private donation would have to pay for it, and we'd have about 2 weeks in order to raise it, just to have an aerial show?
Mr. Mayor, in order to get the ordering in place appropriately, I think that's about what we would need, a couple weeks to have that come together, if that's a possibility.
Okay. Okay. And the only thing on a brighter note, I guess, is, if you call it a brighter note, I did go to Travel and Tourism today for their meeting. Of course, you look at hotels around here, it's kind of dismal. There's a great percentage of employees have been laid off or have not had jobs. Ramcoda in particular puts 75 employees. They've laid that many off. So hopefully we'll see a turnaround. But if there was a bright side to that meeting, it came in the form of, we were having discussions about CNFR in next year. Of course, like everything else shutting down, that has the fly-in that was scheduled to come here also shut down. And so everything has basically been moved 1 year. So everything was planned around CNFR, and the fly-in that was going to take place is still a go for next year. Doesn't do us any good this year, but I had very high hopes of a lot of people in the seats at CNFR, and I think that fly-in certainly would have helped out this year, and it definitely will next year. So I look at it as it gives us another year just to fine-tune things and fill those seats up next year. So, but it's a good thing that that's still happening. So, other than that, I think that's all I've got for tonight. I think we have Judge Cowley on the line, and if we can take a moment just to get an update from her, and before we call it a night. So,
Mr. Mayor, Council, can you hear me okay?
we can. Go ahead, Judge.
Excellent. So I just kind of wanted to provide a brief update. We're planning on opening on Monday so that we can get our public served, following Zulima's guidance with the reopening plan and the Supreme Court's guidance. And we're very much looking forward to getting opened back up and getting back to serving the public.
Okay. Anybody have any questions of the judge, or? All right. Well, glad we can get some of those cases rolling now, so. Okay, anything else from anybody tonight? Okay, well, then that'll conclude our meeting for this evening. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to the judge for the update. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Goodbye.
Dude, I saw her go offline. I was like, ooh.